But do you think in future you won't want to do a book on West Bengal?
No. To do a book on a state, you need the support of the state, not in terms of financial resources, but in terms of access to people, access to data, facilitation in traveling around. It is easier if I am in NITI, but we are not talking about my being in NITI. So, some states were a bit more favorably inclined than others. But the other book that I did in sort of passing, I will see if I have got a copy, I will give it to you, is a book on Ujjain, which has just been, which was published a few months ago.
Ujjain?
No, there is Singhast, as you probably know, that is going on.
Yeah.
So, the Madhya Pradesh government wanted a book on Singhast to coincide with Singhast. I said, look, Singhast is very boring. Singhast can be 1 chapter, 2 chapters, but I'd much rather do a book on Ujjain, on the history of Ujjain. Yeah. So that was published a few months ago. It's been published in English as well as in Hindi.
Okay. So now let's come to your role in NITI Aayog. So there are 2 questions which I want to ask. First, I want to ask is, I think it's a standard question. How do you think is NITI Aayog different from Planning Commission? And second, there is a lot of talk about the scope and the mandate and the efficacy of of NITI Aayog. Is it really relevant given your constrictions which you have? So maybe let's first talk about
I like that word, constrictions. But okay, let me put it like this: that there is a NITI Aayog mandate, which is a very, very broad mandate. If you look at that mandate, there is a lot of overlap between what that mandate is and what the Planning Commission was supposed to do in 51. The trouble is that in 51, whatever be the mandate, in the last 10 years, the Planning Commission deviated from that mandate. So, essentially what the Planning Commission ended up doing is these 5-yearly plans, the routing of funds, plan funds to the states, the annual plan discussions with the states, which are a bit of a joke, too much of control from Delhi. This is what the Planning Commission did in the last 10 years or so. NITI Aayog's mandate is, firstly, implicit in that mandate is a greater degree of decentralization. Part of which is also reflected in the recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission and the subsequent determination of centrally funded schemes or centrally sponsored schemes on the basis of recommendations of subgroups of chief ministers. There were 3 subgroups of chief ministers, one on centrally sponsored schemes, one on the Swachh Bharat mission, and the third one on skill development. Shivraj Singh Chauhan, Prakash Singh Badal, Chandrababu Naidu. These recommendations were submitted in October 2015, end of October 2015. So, one part of it is that chief ministers don't come here, we go to the states. Second is decentralized planning, building up planning in a perspective plan sense, not in the 5-yearly plan sense. And perspective planning was part of the original Planning Commission mandate. They never did it, which is, I look at India 20 years down the line. This is where I want India to be, let's say in 2025. According to these indicators, this being NITI Aayog, the focus will always be on social sectors, physical connectivity. That is the lens we look at everything through.
Not infrastructure?
Infrastructure also, I said I included in that. Okay. So, suppose I want the infant mortality rate to be this in such and such a place. That requires public expenditure. But the nature of that public expenditure, the nature of that public intervention will vary from Bihar to Kerala. It may vary between 2 districts within Bihar. So, it is decentralized planning, building up planning in that sense from below. The Prime Minister wants us to do it from villages. We essentially said we don't have data on villages. So, we are beginning district upwards. Okay. And the Planning Commission never collected data on states. We have collected data on districts, and we have actually put it up on our website so that you can access it, anyone can access it. There are problems with the data which we will correct, but whatever be the problems with the data, we have just put it up there. So, one part of that exercise is that. The third part of our mandate is to act as a think tank for the government. Now, think tank may mean things are referred to you by the government, which will remain in the private domain of the government. The world at large will not necessarily know that something has been referred to you. And a think tank role where we also react on our own to some issue and tell the government that this is what you should do, and we may have a position which may be slightly different from whatever a ministry's position is. Three issues actually. Firstly, 15-16 was a distorted year, because states had not factored in the recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission, and as I said, till October 2015 you didn't even know what the recommendations of the subgroups of chief ministers will be. From 16-17 that will be eased. Point number 2 is, an organization does not begin to function only because you've got a vice chairman and 3 members. You need people below that. And when you want people below that, you don't want people only from the government, you want to recruit people also from outside. That takes time. We have only now begun to do it. So that little bit which determines the extent to which you can be a think tank on your own will also begin to take off from 16-17.
So it's too early to judge the work.
It's too early. And the last bit which I am acknowledging is, we have not been particularly good so far in disseminating what we do to the rest of the world.
Very. I think that could be said about the government and the political class. A
lot of the stuff we have put up on our website now, but people don't necessarily go visit the website.
Yes. I think that is very important, because I think public at large somehow doesn't know what NITI Aayog is doing. And because, you know, I think the previous planning commission, in whatever form it was, used to use a sort of a carrot and stick approach, because they used to have the funds, but NITI Aayog doesn't have the funds to allocate. They can only make recommendations.
Yes.
Also, the states are not bound to follow the policies which you're giving.
Sure.
Somehow, gives a sense that NITI Aayog is a toothless body, which it in fact is not, because a lot of work, because you have made these subgroups of ministers, a lot of this work is going to get adopted, but somehow I think it's not going to get, it is not getting, percolated.
No, the dissemination, all I can say is, I recognize that there's a problem with dissemination, but the dissemination has improved a bit in the last 1.5 months or so. Certainly, if you are talking about social media, it hasn't improved that much in the what is called the mainstream media. But to give examples of the kinds of things we do, is we cannot compel states to come to us, because we no longer have either the carrot or the stick. And states differ. So there are some states which sort of have said, please help us. Example of that being, I think Sumit knows about that, is Rajasthan. We are doing a massive exercise on reforming their laws. About 65 laws, 63 laws, old statutes, we recommended for repeal. They have already been repealed. Now we are on the next exercise on reforming the laws that remain. We are doing a similar exercise for Jammu and Kashmir now.
So how cooperative have the chief ministers been?
It's difficult to generalize. It's difficult to generalize because, as I said, we cannot force the states. In the Planning Commission and also in NITI, there is an allocation of portfolios amongst members according to ministries' themes as well as states. So I personally know only about the states that I deal with. Now, out of them, you see the northeastern states, all of the northeast is with me. The northeastern states are in a different basket. Their problems are slightly special. But amongst the other states, I cannot say all of them have wanted NITI, but nor can I say none of them have wanted NITI. And as long as some of them want NITI, and this has nothing to do with politics. For example, I mentioned Rajasthan, but Kerala also is interested in what we do and our help.
Any complex states being okay with?
I just mentioned Kerala.
Oh, Kerala. Okay.
There is only one state. I am now not talking about the ones that are in my portfolio. There is only one state which regards NITI as an enemy.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, which one is that? Would you want to name it?
I will name it once the camera is switched off.
Okay.
But you can guess.
Okay. Yes. So, also there has been a task force set on poverty reduction.
Yes.
Do you think it's now time that we do away with concepts like poverty line and stuff like those? I mean, I think it's time we start looking at with a different social structure at removing poverty.
You see, look, a lot of reportage has not really understood what this task force is about. This task force is not on poverty measurement.
It's about reduction.
It is about poverty reduction. Measuring poverty is a very side issue, and I will answer that in a minute. Now, that draft report is about to be put up on the website. We will get comments and then we will finalize it. The starting off point is the following, that no one wants to be voluntarily poor. If you are able-bodied in the working age groups, you are not voluntarily poor, you are poor because you don't have access to A, B, C, D. So, public intervention must be in terms of ensuring A, B, C, D. Despite that, there will be certain geographical areas, certain households who will require subsidies, because there is a time period before people can obtain access to the markets. The entire controversy with the old planning commission was, part of the reason was that those data were based on NSS, the National Sample Survey. NSS is a survey, it is not a census. So, it doesn't enable, it enables me to know that X percentage of Madhya Pradesh is below the poverty line. It does not tell me which household is poor or not.
Yes, exactly.
In June of 2004, mind you, the President made an address to Parliament, and there the President said that in the list of things that the UPA 1 government was going to do in the first 100 days, paragraph number 38, you can check that, she said that there would be decentralized identification through the involvement of Gram Sabhas. Now, finally, we have something called a SECC database, which is based on a census, it is not a survey. So, on the Panchayat Bhavan, your name is put up. If your name is not there, you can object, and if your name is there but should not be there, someone else can go and object. So, those lists for the rural side, not the urban side yet, urban side has not been finalized, is now being done. So, therefore, the argument is that now states, not NITI Aayog, can decide on the basis of the SECC data who you want to subsidize and to what extent. There is an automatic inclusion category which is very small, there is an automatic exclusion category, but in between states can decide.
So, automatic inclusion category is based on what?
Automatic inclusion and exclusion. Inclusion is, automatic inclusion is on, there are things like whether my family has been bonded labor in the past, etc., etc.
Are you even saying?
We are not saying this. This is SECC as agreed to by states.
And like scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, even they are making it to the.
Not scheduled caste, scheduled tribes.
Automatic inclusion.
Yes.
And automatic.
But we have not decided.
Yeah, of course. And automatic exclusion.
Automatic exclusion is if I possess, let us say, a car.
Okay.
If I pay income taxes, personal income taxes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, as the head of the panel which was restructuring railway, one of the suggestions which you gave was, of doing away with the rail budget altogether. Now, I personally found it, like a huge thing to say, because there was a time when we used to be in school that a lot of people used to tell that railway is like a small country. The Indian Railways is like the amount of land, the amount of staff, the amount of people they have, the amount of finances they're managing. So it requires maybe its own rail budget. Now, doing away would mean that putting it all together with the main budget, which is already very complicated. So I want to understand what's your thinking behind doing away with the railway.
Well, that leads to several comments actually. The expression that was then used by a Britisher in the colonial days was, in Latin, translates into empire within an empire. So, the railways have been described as empire within an empire. Railway budget I will react to in a minute. We had 5 main pillars in our recommendations on the railways, and as a committee we are not concerned with the implementation because we submitted a report and that's it. It's a separate matter that I am in NITI and railways is part of my portfolio, so therefore I am concerned with implementation wearing a different hat. We had 5 main pillars. Pillar number 1 was commercial accounting. Pillar number 2 was decentralization, not just to the level of the GMs, but all the way down, DRMs, station superintendents, train superintendents. Pillar number 3, which we were endorsing because it was already part of government policy, private entry across a whole variety of things. Pillar number 4 was an independent regulator, what we called an independent regulator, and Pillar number 5 was breaking down the silos in the way entry into the railway services happens, which is 7 directly railways. If you include the medical, it's 8 different services. So, we wanted them to be unified. These are the 5 main pillars. I think primarily for tactical reasons, the railway minister does not want to make implementation too visible, because it can be counterproductive. The objective is to get the reforms going, not to make them visible. So, you will not find any direct mention of what has been done in the railway budget, although he mentioned the committee and he mentioned me. Take commercial accounting. Commercial accounting has already been done on a pilot basis, initially in Ajmer division and Northern Railways. So, it will soon be done everywhere. Take the private entry. The private entry is already part of government policy. Several things have happened. Take the regulator. It is not being called a regulator, but the concept note for a railway development authority is already up there on the website. We wanted it to be set up statutorily. What this suggests is, first let it be set up in an executive way, because legislation takes time, and then it will be converted into a statutory body. Silos is the only one where there has not been much of movement. All the others, decentralization also has happened.
I've seen a lot of movement in the regulator as well. You told me about the body which has been set up, but do you think the government was very receptive about having, or the railways were very receptive about having a regulator?
It depends on what you mean by the railways, because there are a large number of people employed by the railways, and there is a certain bureaucracy which sits there in Rail Bhavan.
Yes.
The two are not the same.
Yes.
The bureaucracy which sits there in Rail Bhavan will not naturally want their turf to be. So, that bureaucracy is of course resisting it. As a terminal goal, we said not overnight, because these reforms cannot happen overnight. They take time, they are incremental. As a terminal goal, we said there is no need for the railway budget, and I will come back to this in a minute. And we also said ministry will determine policy. The regulator will ensure that that policy is implemented in terms of fair competition amongst all the players, which may also include private players. And the railway board will only remain a board for the public sector provider. This is the structure we contemplated.
Yeah.
So far as the budget is concerned, legally to change fares, there is no need to go to parliament. Yeah. It's not like the union budget. So far as the union budget is concerned, what is the issue? There is a gross budgetary support that the union government gives to the railways. In return, it gets a dividend. Now, this just requires 2 sentences in the union budget. You take this year's budget, railway budget.
Yeah.
What is there in the budget? Nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
So, automatically the railway budget is actually disappearing, because the railway budget has been equated with new trains, more concessions.
It's more about giving information. They're not giving information about change of fares, even though they might be increasing fares.
Yes, so it can happen at any time. So, this is the railway budget speech this year, to my mind, was like a white paper on the railways. That is it. So, the railway budget is disappearing.
Okay. So, and what are your thoughts about this year's union budget?
This year's union budget, you must.
Do you think it was a very safe budget?
I am not very going to use the word safe, because look at it like this. Much of the expenditure is in the nature of revenue expenditure. It has been determined, predetermined. Whether it is wages and salaries, pensions, at best you could have deferred the pay commission, but you cannot not implement it. There is OROP, which you have to implement. Only subsidies to some extent you can target.
Yeah.
The devolution in terms of the finance commission has been cast in stone. The subgroups of the chief ministers have made their recommendations, which have been accepted. So, you have no degrees of freedom on expenditure. Very little you can do on expenditure. If you want to stimulate investments, you have to use off-budget resources, not through the budget. You want to convey a signal of fiscal consolidation. So, one moot question was from 3.9%, does one reduce it to 3.5%, does one reduce it to 3.7%, or does one keep it at 3.9%? On the revenue side, tax revenue growth, nominal GDP growth rate is very realistic, it is 11%, particularly because inflation rates, or therefore the GDP deflator is down. Tax revenue growth is 11.3%. To give a benchmark, most budgets historically used to be 14.5%. So, I do not think anyone can legitimately question the budget on the tax revenue projections, but the balancing act has been on the non-tax revenue side, disinvestments as well as spectrum. Disinvestments have not happened to the extent they should have happened even in 15-16, but as you probably know, the identification of which PSCs are to be disinvested has now come to NITI Aayog. So, maybe it will be speeded up. I therefore do not think one can criticize the budget too much. There are just two things I can mention. One is the issue on the EPF. It could have been argued out better. There are cogent reasons for doing what was done, but it was not explained very well. The second thing that was not explained very well is the cesses on the service sector side, because the issue there is we do not know what the revenue neutral GST rate will be, that will be determined by the GST Council, but will presumably be at least 16%. If it is going to be 16%, services which were at 14%, some cess, but forget that, 14% will therefore have to increase. Goods which were about 16% will decrease. So, there is a trade-off. Service sector rates will go up, that will come down. So, the service sector rate will go up to 16% once we have a GST. What has happened this year? It has gone up to 15%. That increase to 15% has not been explained sufficiently well. The limited point, of course, is that increase to 15% has happened through a cess, not an increase in the tax rate, and the reason is obvious, the cess is not shared with the states. The reason why this was done is if you have a cess, you can reduce the deficit to 3.5. If it is a tax, you would probably have had to have a deficit at 3.7 as a fiscal deficit ratio. And the reduction in the fiscal deficit was important because it was a signal. It was a signal not just to the external world, it was a signal also to the RBI, to everyone. Yes, to everyone. Yes.
And you can't do it through tax, you have to do it.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you two things, maybe these are part of the budget things, but maybe, a lot of for our viewers and public value, maybe as a pure economist, you might not like these things, but one I want to talk about, the fall of crude oil prices. A lot of people, I'm talking about common people, this is a narrative, which is a media built narrative that the crude oil prices were $110, now they have come to $30. All over the world, people are enjoying really low prices at the gas station. Why are we not enjoying it? And the Petroleum Minister Dharmendra Pradhan very recently said it in Lok Sabha that see, we reduced our prices 16 times, but rest of that the price reduction which we had, we used it for welfare schemes. Now again we come to the point of how this was not communicated at all well enough to the public at large. But do you agree with this? I mean, is there a chance that the prices of petrol and diesel can come down because the...
No, I will state it in a completely different kind of way. I will state it in the way that we manage our household budgets.
Yes.
That to buy a pizza means I cannot go to a movie. There is a prioritization of resources.
Yep.
This is something that is taught in first year of economics, opportunity costs. After that, everyone forgets about opportunity costs. So, the issue is, what do you want me to do with the money? There are some things which are legislation. Food Security Act is legislation, MGNREGS is legislation. After all of this, after 14 Finance Commission, Pay Commission, centrally sponsored schemes, this is the limited amount of money I have left. Now, what do you want me to do with it? You cannot simultaneously want better highways. You see, in terms of the constitution, certain things are union government subjects. You cannot want better highways, better railways, and also expect the
prices to
come down.
No, but I mean, of course, the government decides that when the crude oil prices come down, this is the amount of the money which we have to spend at these places. Now we are left with this. This will use in reducing the prices, and this will reduce in giving you other services. But this is something which they did not know about. The crude oil prices reduction is something which was like a bonus. So
no. It was factored into conscious decisions to increase public expenditure.
You think public expenditure?
Public expenditure, yes. You see, you will see it very perceptibly for roads.
Okay.
And now, not so much in terms of just allocations. The allocations happened. But you will now begin to see it for railways also.
Okay.
You will begin to see it in terms of the better connectivity throughout the Northeast.
Oh, that's very
because this is very, in a sense, it's an important signal that so many decades after independence, all northeastern states did not have a railway connection, did not have an airport. Now by 2020, all of them will.
Have airports,
Now, so this is the point I am making. So which one do you want? So far as the so-called middle class is concerned, yes, you could have had low petrol prices, but does that mean that you are willing to say, I don't want better roads?
So, but do you at least concede that there is maybe a communication problem with the government?
In the way I have stated it, that these are the limited resources that I have, and this is how I propose to spend it, that prioritization and this issue that resources are scarce. My grouse has been not just with this finance minister, but with every finance minister since 1991, because not a single finance minister has stood up and said this, that I am doing exactly what you do when you manage your household budget.
See, I think our viewers will have some very good insight because of this point, because this is very, very important to people for realizing. If somebody, it's like Ghar Ka Badai would tell, that this is how I'm managing the finances, and people would immediately agree to it. But it's like when nothing is communicated, people feel, where did that money go?
Yes.
We have to tell them where that money has gone. I think people will be satisfied. One more thing which I want to talk about is, while there was this talk of the budget, there was this very, very major issue of NPAs, which is going on in this country, and I have a very particular question on this. The RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan very recently, I think 4 days back in a talk, said that the media and the people are playing up the NPA issue so much, even though the number is huge, it's almost like 4 lakh crores, but not all NPAs are bad assets. And we should not stop lending or scaring the banks into stopping lending, because that would put the economy in a rut. Now, my point is, when I do not know if 4 lakh crores is the correct number, or if it's just the tip of the iceberg, or if the number, that there have been people who have said that the number could rise up to almost as high as 11 or 12 lakh crores in coming times. Do you think a statement like this it was necessary, or was it's almost like a pat on the back of those people who have NPAs going on? I mean, I understand we cannot stop lending, but I mean, when the numbers are so high, when our banks are literally in the ICU, how can an RBI governor make a statement like this?
Well, I cannot speak on behalf of Raghu. Raghu is a friend, and Raghu has said things on Vijay Mallya also, which I don't quite think that he should have said, but let that be. I am inclined to think that the figure is at least 3 lakh crores.
Okay.
But 2 points I want to make on this. Firstly, I don't think this is the disease, this is a symptom. Now, what do I mean by that? Much of this was infrastructure projects. Most infrastructure projects are today, even now, debt driven, they are not equity driven. Banks are not geared to lend for 20-year, 25-year projects. Once upon a time, we used to have the DFIs. In our wisdom of the reforms, we thought there was no useful distinction between the two, so the DFI should not be there. Banks are the same as DFIs. But banks are fundamentally there to lend for working capital purposes. They cannot handle these projects, and we have not solved the problem. Cost of private capital is always higher than the cost of public capital. So, I have a revenue model, In that revenue model, I have factored in some kind of returns and I have borrowed from banks. Now suddenly the economy goes into a downswing. My revenue model goes for a toss and I am stuck with these stressed assets. Some of these can be rescheduled, but I think the fundamental problem which we have not resolved is how do we finance infrastructure projects which we all want, and some of them will be private sector driven, and as I said, banks are not geared to do this. Now look at this 3 lakh crores, some of it can be rescheduled. The government has pumped in some equity, there is the capital infusion, there is the Indrayanu scheme.
It's not going to be enough.
No, but what I am saying is that desirable? Because that doesn't solve the problem.
Disease.
It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't solve the way the public sector banks are managed.
It's a short-term solution.
Can I divest equity? Can I sell off a can I sell off a PSU? A lot of right-wing people will say, right-wing in the economic sense will say, sell it off. You tell me, look at the capital requirements to set up a new bank and look at amount of money you would have to spend to acquire a public sector bank. Why would you go and acquire a public sector bank? It makes no commercial sense.
Yes.
So even that route is not a very easy route. So I don't know what the solution is, because I don't think there are any easy solutions.
I think we talk about how the banks, the public sector banks, do not know how to finance infrastructure projects, but do you think there is a part of the disease is also, there is a talk about, internal corruption maybe,
I'm not going to use the word corruption. I am instead going to say a lot of unnecessary interference in the way public sector banks operate, and which extends also to loan disbursal.
Yes.
I am not going to use the word corruption. Yes. But I will also say that there are public sector banks and there are public sector banks, and all of them are not the same. There is clearly a case for a shakeout in the public sector banks, consolidation, mergers, some exit.
Or you really think consolidation, there was a talk about consolidating into 6 banks?
So all of them, no, I am not saying that someone sits and decides there are 6, but purely on the basis of sort of market driven forces almost,
Okay.
The public sector banks need to restructure themselves, quite apart from the mindsets.
And you said the amount you think is 3 lakh crores, you think that amount can rise in coming years? Or
if you take into account the possibility of rescheduling, and remember there was a committee that was set up by Vijay Kelkar on the PPPs, which had recommendations on what do you do in case there is a dispute, because some of the things got into legal disputes. That's come to us for comment. So eventually that part, that where it was stuck in some kind of not litigation suggests courts, but some kind of dispute resolution mechanism, that will be eased. So I don't think that 3 lakh crores will increase. I gave a 3 lakh crore figure, but I think it will be a little bit lower than that.
Okay.
Once that rescheduling and you eliminate the stalled projects.
Okay. So coming to some bit of politics, so you have been one of the few people who have worked with, as an economist and as a policymaker for both UPA 1, UPA 2 and NDA as well. And you had a very controversial exit from UPA 1 and you were vocal about their policies. So in a way you thought that, this coming of the new government was like a vindication of your stand, that the policies of the previous governments weren't very good? Or what do you think about how this government is functioning as regards the previous government, because you worked with both of them?
Well, you're asking too many questions in the same breath. Obviously, if I am not happy, I would have exited by now, controversy or no controversy. So clearly, empirically, I am happy with whatever is happening. But on the broad philosophical thing, let me state my philosophical position. My philosophical position is, part of it I hinted at earlier, my philosophical position is, in the form of public expenditure, the best thing we can do is to create public infrastructure and provide services. That is essential. Northeast, the 100,000 villages that don't have it, all of that. Now, clearly, and one should not get fixated on the budget. One should look at what has been happening outside the budget, look at the interventions to get electricity to villages. I am giving that as an example. And let's not get into a debate about whether getting electricity to a village is the same as getting electricity to every household in the village or not. That's a valid criticism, but at least those are being targeted, the infrastructure is being targeted, toilets are being built, roads are being built. The second issue is, which is the controversial one, I think all identification of poor households should be on the basis of individual household characteristics, not collective characteristics like ethnicity, caste, religion, even gender. SCCC does a little bit of it, and you asked me a provocative question about SCs and STs, but that's my individual position. So, am I happy that this government's focus is on what I would regard as priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It will never be 100%. But as long as there is a movement in that direction, I am happy. Unfortunately, what happened with UPA, more so with UPA 2, was a retreat from that. Less so with UPA 1, but more with UPA 2, there was a clear retreat from that.
Almost off the rails.
Yeah.
So, and one of the few questions I want to ask, or I always want to ask from a Bengali is that, what do you think, so we have seen a change of government and we're going to have elections again, and this government has had enough time to perform. As a Bengali, purely as a Bengali, I'm asking, how do you feel this government has performed, as in, or on two measures I'm asking. One, as an economy of Bengal. Two, as in, there was a lot of talk about how, during the left regime, the economists never used to have it easy, finding a job used to be really difficult. Has it changed? Has tolerance changed in Mamata Banerjee's regime? And second, has the economy improved?
Well, tolerance and intolerance, these are very dangerous expressions to use.
These days.
So, let me state that many of us have been beneficiaries of the left front, in the sense that many of us exited from West Bengal, and that was certainly good for our individual career paths, and there are several of them. I see no evidence of a reversal of that intellectual flight taking place, despite all kinds of things about Presidency University and this, that and the other. On that limited question in the academic circuit, including the economic circuit, there is no reversal. There is no reversal. Indicators. Indicators depends a little bit on the indicators. If one is talking about growth rates of state domestic product, state gross domestic product, West Bengal has not been doing that badly. It's sort of growing at about 7.5% or so now, which is better than its historical 6.5%. It's doing phenomenally well in something like health. Open defecation districts, West Bengal is doing remarkably well. Where it is not doing well is that for a very long time, administration, and I am sticking out my neck and saying this, for a very long time, administration in West Bengal was supplanted by the party apparatus. There was no administration as we understand it. Has that changed? No, it hasn't, except one party has been replaced by another party, and it's a little bit more chaotic now, because sometimes there are several groups within the new party, so you don't really know which party to deal with. So, I would say that in terms of attracting investments, particularly the big ticket corporate kind of investments, not MSME. MSME growth is one of the untold stories in West Bengal, not under this government, but it's been happening for the last 15 years. If you look at visible things like investments, corporate sector investments, that's not happening. But the growth rates are respectable, and health, etc., some indicators are not that bad.
Okay.
But in and around primarily Kolkata.
In and around, okay.
Primarily, not 24 Parganas, South 24 Parganas, that area.
So, sir, one last question we'd like to end up.
Did you wait, but did you ask me a question about what is likely to happen in the elections? I'm not sure whether you did or not.
No, sir, I did ask you.
No, I think there is no question that the Trinamool is going to come back with reduced numbers, but I don't think there is any question about it now.
Yeah, okay. And so there is no resurrection of left which is happening at all.
Resurrection of the left. You see, this is one of the peculiarities of our electoral system. The left continues to have a high share in terms of vote percentages.
Because they are a system.
Yeah, and
if the number of seats go down, the system never goes down.
Yes, so that percentage will exist, but in terms of that being converted into seats, no.
Yeah, because a lot of people in tell me these days in CPIM offices are buzzing these days. They feel they have got new comrades coming in. So
I think it will make a dent in North Bengal, Northern Bengal. Northern Bengal, there will be a dent. Okay. Elsewhere, no.
Okay. So I'd just like to end up with the last question, sir. This is again just for our viewers, and I want to have your insight on this, because you have been, a student of, Indian government and as an economist, and you've seen things, with a much more insight. The atmosphere of Indian politics and, has been very acrimonious and caustic these days. And you think this is only because of more media and more social media available, or you feel this has been the case forever? I mean, because I think I've been a student of Indian politics since, let's say, maybe 15 years, but you have seen it from a much larger time and a much larger microscope. I just want to know if and as a youth, as a student, sometimes it turns me off. So do you feel that way as well? Is it more acrimonious?
I think several layers of response to that. Firstly, acrimony tends to happen when there is more than one view on a certain issue. If there is only one single view, there is no particular reason for acrimony. So to some extent, these alternative challenges, alternative views, in some senses began to happen towards the end of the 1960s. Probably got a bit more accentuated in the 80s when media proliferated and there were reactions to the emergency. A lot of it also has to do with the constant media scrutiny. The constant media scrutiny also means, particularly electronic media, that a mic is thrust in front of my mouth. I do not know when I should speak and when I should control myself. So a lot of people shoot their mouths off, and this is not any one particular party, across political parties. Add to that the complications of social media. So that perhaps is an inevitable part of the churn. I think the way I would interpret your question is more in the context of what has been happening in Parliament. Because Parliament, legislative assemblies are a different thing. Parliament is supposed to be a forum, whether it's Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, for legislative business. And I can debate with you as much as I want within Parliament, provided I remain civil and courteous, and that does not transcend into acrimony outside that debate. One reason for worry is that has not happened. In other words, that acrimony within Parliament has extended outside.
Yeah. So thank you very much, viewers. I hope you have had an enjoyable meeting and you have gained a lot of insight from this interview. I'd like to thank you, Professor Debroy, for giving us time.
Thank you.